Welcome to Lost at 3 a.m. Put your phone down, close your eyes, and let this be the last video you hear tonight. Relax, breathe, and let's begin. If you clicked on this video, chances are you're familiar with the IT Crowd, the quirky British sitcom that's become a cult classic. It's one of those shows that's perfect for winding down, with its dry humour and lovable, if slightly dysfunctional characters. Whether you've seen every episode or just caught a few random moments, there's something about it that draws you in, right? Tonight, we're going to take a closer look at the IT Crowd. We'll dive into the history behind it, the strange and lovable characters who made it unforgettable, and the humour that somehow still feels fresh, even years after it first aired. From Moss's awkward brilliance to Roy's laid-back approach to life, there's a lot to unpack in this beloved show. But don't worry, we're not going to dive too deep or get too technical. This isn't about dissecting every joke or every plot twist. No, tonight's about relaxing with some fun facts, a few behind-the-scenes moments, and remembering just why the IT Crowd became such a timeless favourite. So, take a breath, let go of your thoughts from the day, and let's take a moment to enjoy the quirky world of the IT Crowd. Trust me, it'll be the perfect way to drift off tonight. The IT Crowd first aired in the UK on February 3rd, 2006, but despite its modest beginnings, it quickly became a show that would leave a lasting mark on TV comedy. Created by Graham Linehan, the show took a simple premise, life in an IT department, and turned it into a blend of absurdity, wit, and eccentricity that has kept fans hooked for years. At its core, the IT Crowd was all about the strange, often hilarious lives of the employees at Reynholm Industries. Set in the basement of a corporate office building, the show focused on three main characters: Moss, Roy, and Jen. Moss, the awkward and socially inept genius; Roy, the slacker who somehow gets by; and Jen, the normal one, who didn't know much about IT but found herself managing the department anyway. From the very beginning, the IT Crowd was a bit of an experiment. Its humour, which ranged from deadpan one-liners to surreal scenarios, wasn't exactly mainstream, and yet, that's exactly what helped it carve out such a dedicated fan base. The show didn't try to cater to everyone. Instead, it embraced its nerdy quirks and allowed its characters to shine in the most awkward, hilarious ways possible. It wasn't just about the characters though. The writing was sharp, delivering quick-witted jokes while tackling a variety of themes, from office dynamics to the very nature of technology itself. The show's setting, with its outdated computers and a general disregard for technology, reflected a time when many companies were still trying to figure out how to integrate the internet into their day-to-day work. The absurdity of it all was, in a way, a reflection of how some people viewed the IT world. A mysterious, sometimes frustrating world that most people didn't understand. But despite its oddball humour and low-budget aesthetic, the IT Crowd struck a chord with audiences. It didn't take long for the show to gain a devoted fan base, and soon it was being talked about as one of the best comedies of the 2000s. It wasn't just popular in the UK either. Fans from all around the world were tuning in, drawn to the show's distinctive style and its unique approach to comedy. Now, almost 2 decades later, the IT Crowd remains one of those rare shows that, even after it ended, continues to make people laugh and feel nostalgic. Its quirky characters, memorable lines, and absurd moments are still quoted and referenced by fans, proving just how impactful this little show really was. So how did this bizarre, basement-dwelling comedy become a TV classic? Well, part of the magic is in its characters, but we'll get to that soon. For now, just know that from its very first episode, the IT Crowd was more than just a tech-centered sitcom. It was a show that proved humour, no matter how strange, could bring people together. When we think of the IT Crowd, the first images that probably come to mind are of Moss's awkward smile, Roy's eternal frustration, and Jen's desperate attempts to fit in. These three characters are the heart of the show, and each of them is as unique as the office environment they inhabit. Let's start with Moss, Played by Richard Ayoade, Moss is the brilliant but socially clueless IT technician who's as comfortable with code as he is with completely misunderstanding human interaction. Moss is one of those characters who might seem like an oddball at first, but over time, we realise there's a certain charm in his socially awkward genius. His deadpan humour and tendency to speak in a flat monotone make him a constant source of hilarity, especially when he's paired with the equally bizarre Roy. His obsession with gadgets, computers, and the obscure world of IT trivia often leads to some of the most memorable moments on the show. Then there's Roy, played by Chris O'Dowd. Roy is the office slacker who, despite being a part of the IT department, has absolutely no desire to actually fix anything. His go-to line, "Have you tried turning it off and on again?" became an instant classic. Unlike Moss, who is always enthusiastic about technology, Roy is often just trying to get by, sometimes with as little effort as possible. Despite his laziness, Roy is surprisingly endearing, and his sarcastic humour often adds the perfect counterbalance to Moss's eccentricity. His constant annoyance with the office's many problems and his hilarious attempts to avoid work make him a standout character, one who's equally relatable and hilarious. Finally, we have Jen, played by Catherine Parkinson. Jen's role in the IT department is a little unconventional. She's the manager, despite knowing almost nothing about IT. Jen is the one who's supposed to be the normal one, the anchor to keep things together in the midst of all the chaos. But what makes her so entertaining is the fact that she's constantly out of her depth. She often finds herself in situations where her lack of technical knowledge leads to comic disaster, but she handles it with a mix of charm and desperation. Jen is caught between trying to be professional and navigating the bizarre world of Moss and Roy, which leads to some of the most awkward and funny situations in the show. Together, Moss, Roy, and Jen create a dynamic that's both hilarious and relatable. Each one of them represents a different aspect of the workplace. The highly competent but socially awkward employee, Moss, the lazy and disinterested worker, Roy, and the well-meaning but overwhelmed manager, Jen. Their interactions with each other and with the often nonsensical situations they find themselves in make the show a unique and fun experience. And it's not just their personalities that make them memorable. The chemistry between Moss, Roy, and Jen is undeniable. Whether they're bickering over something trivial or teaming up to solve an office problem, their bond is at the heart of the show. They might be an odd trio, but together they form the perfect team to navigate the absurd world of Reynholm Industries. One of the things that makes the IT crowd so special is how it takes something as seemingly mundane as the IT department and turns it into a hilarious, almost mythical setting. The IT department, which in many offices might be the least glamorous or exciting part of the company, becomes a kind of refuge for our three main characters. But what makes this department stand out in the show isn't just the strange tech problems Moss and Roy deal with, or even Jen's chaotic attempts to manage them. It's how the IT crowd plays with the idea of technology and what people think of it. In most office environments, the IT department is typically the place you go when everything breaks, when your computer crashes, or when something just doesn't work and you have no idea why. The IT crowd takes this stereotype and runs with it, exaggerating every part of it, from the outdated equipment they use to the weirdly complex problems that no one else understands. The IT department here is presented as a dark, mysterious world where technology is both revered and feared. The setting itself, located in the basement of Reynholm Industries, is almost a character in its own right, adding to the sense that the IT department is a forgotten, slightly ominous corner of the office. But beyond the physical setting, the IT crowd also explores the role that technology plays in the modern world. In many ways, the IT department represents the divide between those who embrace technology and those who are completely baffled by it. Moss and Roy, who live and breathe tech, are often surrounded by people in the office who barely understand how their computers work, let alone why they don't. Their frustration with the rest of the office's lack of technical knowledge is a constant source of comedy. Then there's Jen. As the department head, Jen is supposed to be the bridge between the tech-savvy world of IT and the rest of the office. But the reality is, she has no idea what's going on in the basement. Her total lack of technical knowledge makes her the perfect comedic foil to Moss and Roy, who can fix almost anything but can't explain it to her in a way that makes sense. Her awkward attempts to keep the department running smoothly, despite having no understanding of the very thing it does, form the foundation for a lot of the show's humour. It's this combination of the absurd with the familiar that makes the IT department setting in the IT crowd so memorable. On one hand, we're watching two characters who know everything about computers and tech, dealing with situations that seem almost impossible to explain. On the other hand, we have Jen, trying to make sense of a world that is totally outside her comfort zone. The resulting dynamic is a brilliant mix of technical jargon, misunderstandings, and slapstick humour. In a way, the IT department becomes the ultimate metaphor for the divide between the tech world and the real world. A place where those who are most knowledgeable about technology often struggle to connect with those who just want to get their work done without dealing with a never-ending stream of technical issues. But in the IT crowd, that divide isn't just frustrating, it's endlessly entertaining. When we talk about the IT crowd, it's impossible not to mention the brilliance of Richard Ayoade's portrayal of Moss. Moss, with his awkward social skills, peculiar humour, and vast technical knowledge, is a character unlike any other on television, and Ayoade brings him to life in a way that makes the character feel both surreal and completely endearing. Ayoade's performance is a masterclass in understated comedy. Moss's deadpan delivery, his confusion over basic social interactions, and his awkwardness in everyday situations are all played with such precision that they don't just come across as funny, they feel authentic. Moss is the kind of character who could easily fall into the trap of being a one-note nerd stereotype, but Ayoade adds so much depth and charm to him that Moss becomes far more than that. Take Moss's mannerisms, for example, his slightly jerky movements, his tendency to speak at full speed about completely random topics, and his complete obliviousness to the world around him are all things that Ayoade handles so effortlessly. There's an elegance to how he navigates Moss's quirks. Everything is just a little too over the top, yet somehow it all feels believable. But it's not just about the physical comedy. Ayoade's timing with Moss's one-liners and awkward pauses is perfect, delivering each punchline with a dry, deadpan style that elevates even the simplest lines into something memorable. Whether Moss is trying to explain a complicated tech issue to Jen or getting caught in an absurd situation, Ayoade manages to make it both funny and, in a strange way, endearing. What's also fascinating about Moss is how he grows as a character over the show's run. At first, he seems like the ultimate socially inept tech genius, someone who's better with computers than with people. But as the series progresses, we start to see moments of vulnerability, moments where Moss reveals that beneath all his awkwardness, there's a person trying to navigate the world in his own way. Ayoade brings out this vulnerability with such subtlety that it makes Moss even more lovable. He's not just the punchline of every joke. He's a fully realized character with his own dreams, insecurities, and moments of clarity. Ayoade's ability to balance Moss's social ineptitude with his technical brilliance is what makes the character stand out. There's this constant contrast between how smart he is when it comes to technology and how out of his depth he is when it comes to human interactions. But rather than making Moss a tragic character or one-dimensional, Ayoade plays him with such warmth and charm that we can't help but root for him, even when he's in the most awkward of situations. The genius of Richard Ayoade's portrayal of Moss is that he manages to take what could be a simple nerd character and turn him into one of the most iconic and beloved figures in modern sitcoms. Moss isn't just a funny character. He's a symbol of how intelligence, quirks, and vulnerability can come together in the most unexpected ways. And Ayoade's performance is what makes Moss unforgettable. When it comes to the characters in the IT crowd, Roy is the one we can all probably relate to the most, at least in the "I've had a rough day at the office" kind of way. Played by Chris O'Dowd, Roy is the slacker of the group, and he's as far from a typical IT genius as you can get, where Moss is the socially awkward computer whiz, and Jen is the well-meaning manager who's out of her depth. Roy is the guy who shows up to work late, does the bare minimum, and usually complains about how much he hates his job. But what makes Roy so compelling isn't just his laziness, it's his charm. He's the type of character who would be completely insufferable in real life, but on the show, he's utterly lovable. You can't help but feel for him, as he's constantly put in ridiculous situations, all because he can't quite shake his lazy guy persona. Whether he's pretending to know more than he does, or avoiding work in creative ways, Roy's deep frustration with his job, and with technology in general, gives him a certain relatability that audiences can't help but love. Roy's constant battle with the mundane, day-to-day realities of the office job are a big part of what makes his character so funny. His lack of enthusiasm about pretty much everything is a direct contrast to Moss's unbridled passion for all things technical. And that contrast creates some of the show's most hilarious moments. But what's great about Roy is that even though he's jaded and sarcastic, there's a certain vulnerability underneath. He's the kind of guy who may act like he doesn't care, but deep down, he's just trying to make it through the day without anyone noticing how much he'd rather be doing literally anything else. One of Roy's most iconic traits is his exasperation with the repetitive nature of the work he does. "Have you tried turning it off and on again?" becomes his catchphrase, not because it's a great solution, but because it's the thing that he's forced to say over and over, day in and day out. This simple, repetitive line captures the essence of Roy's role in the department. He's stuck in a loop, doing the same thing every day, and it's the sheer boredom that drives so much of his comedic frustration. But there's more to Roy than just being the office slacker. In moments of unexpected clarity, we see hints of a guy who's not just a cynic, but someone who genuinely wants more out of life. He's not as clueless as he sometimes appears. Underneath the sarcasm, he's just another person trying to make sense of his job, his relationships, and his place in the world. And that's what makes him such a great character. He may not always have it together, but you can't help but root for him. Roy's lazy antics, his sarcastic one-liners, and his frustration with his job have made him a fan favourite. He's the relatable everyman, the guy who would much rather be anywhere but at work, yet somehow ends up in all these absurd situations because of it. And it's that perfect blend of apathy and heart that makes Roy one of the most memorable characters on the IT crowd. Jen is the one person in the IT crowd who, at least on paper, should have it all together. She's the manager of the IT department at Reynholm Industries after all. She's in charge. But despite her position, Jen is constantly caught in a struggle to fit in with the weird, tech-obsessed world of Moss, Roy, and their endless tech problems. Played by Catherine Parkinson, Jen is the normal one, the person who's supposed to hold everything together, but the show thrives on the fact that she has absolutely no clue what she's doing. What makes Jen such an interesting character is that she's not just a straight-laced foil to the eccentricities of the rest of the team. She's also a fish out of water. Unlike Moss and Roy, Jen doesn't have any technical expertise. She doesn't understand the world of IT beyond the basics, and her lack of knowledge leads to one awkward situation after another. Whether she's trying to fix a computer, dealing with an irate employee, or trying to manage a team that doesn't listen to her, Jen's efforts to fit in never seem to go quite as planned. But that's where the humour comes in. Jen's struggle to understand the tech world is what creates so many of the show's funniest moments. The fact that she is perpetually out of her depth in her own department, despite being the boss, adds an extra layer of absurdity to the dynamic. She tries to act like she's in control, But the reality is that she's just as confused by the IT world as anyone else in the office. And it's that constant tension between her authority and her cluelessness that makes Jen such an entertaining character. Jen's role as the normal one also provides a lot of comic relief in the show. Where Moss and Roy are perfectly content in their weirdness, Jen is always trying and failing to keep a sense of professionalism, even as she's thrust into one bizarre situation after another. For example, her attempts to manage the IT department usually involve her desperately trying to keep her employees in line, only to realize that they're often beyond her control. Whether she's navigating workplace politics or dealing with technical issues that she simply doesn't understand, Jen's efforts to maintain order are constantly undermined by her lack of expertise. But underneath all of Jen's awkwardness and her constant struggle to prove she belongs in the department, there's also a genuine sincerity. Jen is ambitious, hard-working, and, despite not having the technical know-how, she does care about doing her job well. Her attempts to rise above her lack of experience in IT show a person who is willing to learn, even if it takes her a little longer than she'd like to admit. And that's what makes her such a likable character. She might not be perfect, but she's always trying her best. Jen's dynamic with Moss and Roy is also key to her character. While she doesn't always understand them, there's an undeniable bond between the three. They're an odd team, but one that somehow works. Moss and Roy might be completely lost in their own worlds, but they've got Jen's back when it matters. And Jen, despite her own misgivings, always finds a way to rally the group when things start to go off the rails. Her attempts to manage the department might not always go smoothly, but her warmth and good intentions make her the glue that holds the team together, even if it's in the most awkward of ways. Jen might not have the technical skills that Moss and Roy bring to the table, but her heart is always in the right place. And while she might be clueless when it comes to IT, her struggles with fitting in and her persistence in the face of failure make her a character worth rooting for. She's the kind of person you can't help but relate to. Whether you've been in a job where you felt out of your depth or just found yourself in a situation where you had to fake it till you make it. While Moss, Roy, and Jen are undeniably the heart of the IT crowd, the supporting characters are what truly give the show its unforgettable flavor. From the unpredictable, over-the-top Reynholm to the dark and hilarious office workers, these characters add layers of chaos, absurdity, and charm to the already bizarre world of the IT department. Let's dive into some of the standout supporting characters that made the IT crowd so memorable. First up, we have Douglas Reynholm, played by the incomparable Matt Berry. Douglas is the eccentric, unpredictable, and sometimes downright insane CEO of Reynholm Industries. With his flashy suits, outrageous personality, and complete lack of self-awareness, Douglas is the perfect representation of office power gone wrong. He's completely out of touch with reality, running his company based on impulse rather than any sort of logical business sense. What makes Douglas so entertaining is his chaotic energy. He's always either making absurdly inappropriate comments or launching into ridiculous, often nonsensical rants. Despite his complete incompetence, Douglas manages to be strangely charming, and his larger-than-life presence is one of the defining features of the show. His interactions with the IT department are often both hilarious and awkward, especially as he continues to misunderstand or outright ignore their advice. Then there's Richmond Avenel, played by Noel Fielding. Richmond is the gothic, reclusive former employee of Reynholm Industries, who spends most of his time in the building's dark and creepy basement, far away from the rest of the staff. Initially, Richmond's role is fairly minor, but over time, he becomes a fan favorite, thanks to his deadpan humor and his wonderfully bizarre personality. A goth who's so immersed in his subculture that he's essentially a walking stereotype. Richmond's interactions with the main characters, especially when he gets roped back into bizarre office situations, are both funny and oddly endearing. His love for obscure music, dark humor, and his complete detachment from the usual office drama give him a unique place in the series. Richmond represents the oddball outsider, and his character is a perfect foil to the more grounded personalities of Moss, Roy, and Jen. And we can't forget the fantastic turn by Chris Morris as the creepy and mysterious Denholm Reynholm, Douglas's father. Denholm's character is defined by his incredibly awkward interactions with others, a relentless pursuit of efficiency, and his misguided attempts at leadership. Though his screen time is limited compared to others, his moments are unforgettable and perfectly capture the absurdity of corporate culture. His peculiarities and the strange way he runs his business add an extra level of humour to the show, and his oddball leadership style is a great contrast to the chaos happening in the IT department below him. There's also the memorable office staff that come and go, like the incredibly unhelpful HR representative who's constantly caught up in her own bizarre office issues, or the oddball engineers who float in and out of the building, each with their own quirky personalities. What's great about the supporting cast in the IT crowd is that they're not just background players. They all contribute to the show's overall tone, adding their own brand of weirdness to the world of Reynholm Industries. But perhaps the most iconic supporting character is the building itself. The office environment is as much a part of the show as any of the characters, with its outdated computers, dysfunctional systems, and quirky office politics. Whether it's the incredibly outdated network of printers or the hilarious and terrifying moments when the IT department is summoned to fix a ridiculous tech problem, the environment of Reynholm Industries serves as the perfect backdrop for the absurdity that unfolds. The supporting cast in the IT crowd may not always be front and center, but they play a crucial role in creating the show's unique sense of chaos and humor. From Douglas's bizarre antics to Richmond's dark humor, the variety of eccentric characters surrounding the main trio ensures that the show never loses its energy. Each of these characters, whether they're in the background or occasionally take the spotlight, adds something unforgettable to the show. One of the key reasons the IT crowd remains so beloved even years after its original run is its unique brand of humor. The show expertly blends dry wit, absurdity, and quirky character dynamics to create a comedic experience that's unlike anything else on television. From Moss's deadpan delivery to the bizarre office scenarios, the humor is often understated yet perfectly timed. Let's take a closer look at the different elements that make the IT crowd's humor so distinctive. First, there's the dry humor. Much of the comedy in the IT crowd comes from the characters' incredibly dry delivery of some of the most absurd lines imaginable. Moss, especially, is a master of the deadpan expression, where the more bizarre the situation, the less likely he is to react in any noticeable way. The hilarity comes from how serious everyone treats what is, in reality, complete nonsense. For example, when Moss talks about something as simple as an office printer, it's delivered in such a way that you can't help but laugh at how seriously he takes it. It's an understated form of comedy, where the humor is in the character's complete lack of self-awareness. This deadpan humor not only defines Moss but becomes a core feature of the show's style. Then there's the absurdity. The IT crowd is full of moments that are so outlandish and ridiculous they can only work because the show fully embraces them. Whether it's the IT department being called in to solve a problem that has absolutely nothing to do with computers, or Roy and Moss getting caught up in ridiculous office conspiracies, the show doesn't hold back in exploring the absurd. The jokes often get to the point where they're so absurd that they cross the line into surrealism, but the characters' reactions remain grounded, making everything feel even more outlandish. The absurdity doesn't just come from the situations, it's also in the nature of the characters themselves. Each of them operates in their own world of peculiar logic, and the humor comes from watching how they navigate a reality that's often much stranger than it needs to be. The IT crowd also excels at situational comedy, often building humor out of the characters' awkward interactions with each other and the absurd situations they find themselves in. The office setting gives a perfect backdrop for these bizarre scenarios, as each episode brings a new, increasingly ridiculous problem that only Roy, Moss, or Jen could possibly end up in. Whether it's solving a computer-related issue that's not actually a problem, or dealing with an escalating office disaster, the situations are what push the show into its next level of comedic madness. The humour is also rooted in the quirky characters themselves. In most sitcoms, the characters are archetypes that play off each other in predictable ways. But in the IT Crowd, each character is written with such individuality that their quirks don't feel forced. The humour comes from the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle ways their personalities collide. Moss's awkward brilliance and lack of social awareness continually clash with Roy's cynical attitude and laziness, while Jen's attempts to maintain professionalism in the midst of chaos often create some of the most hilarious moments. Their interactions are unpredictable, often leading to comic gold simply because they are so uniquely different in their approaches to the world. Another unique element of the show's humour is the way it often breaks the fourth wall, with absurd situations and moments that seem to pull directly from the world of tech nerd culture. The show often turns to the audience for comedic effect, knowing that many viewers will recognise the absurdity of the situations. It's as if the show is saying, "We know this is ridiculous, but that's what makes it funny." This self-awareness creates a kind of intimacy between the show and its audience, where the viewers are in on the joke, but also not afraid to be taken along for the ride, no matter how bizarre it gets. What makes the humour in the IT Crowd so timeless is its ability to balance the absurd with moments of genuine heart and vulnerability. Despite the outlandish situations and the tech-centered jokes, at its core, the show is about friendship, struggling to fit in, and navigating the absurdity of modern life. Even in the most ridiculous moments, you can always find a glimpse of truth, something that resonates with us on a deeper level. Whether it's Moss trying to fit into social situations, Roy struggling with his lack of motivation, or Jen dealing with the pressures of managing a team she barely understands. These moments of humanity, amidst the absurd, make the humour in the IT Crowd feel grounded and relatable. As we wrap up our journey through the world of the IT Crowd, it's impossible not to reflect on the lasting impact the show has had on both television and its fans. Despite only running for 4 seasons, the IT Crowd has earned a place in the pantheon of cult classics, one of those rare shows that continues to be beloved long after its final episode. So, what makes this quirky, tech-filled sitcom still stand the test of time? Let's explore the legacy of the IT Crowd and why it continues to be a favourite for so many. First and foremost, it's the characters. Moss, Roy, Jen, and the eccentric supporting cast brought something fresh and unique to TV, and it's no wonder that people still quote their iconic lines or remember their strange antics fondly. From Moss's awkward brilliance to Roy's sarcastic laziness, the IT Crowd gave us characters who were more than just funny. They were relatable. Whether you're the one always fixing the office printer, or just trying to get through the workday without having to interact with technology too much, the show's characters captured something universal about the modern workplace. These characters didn't feel like stereotypes. They felt like real people, albeit very quirky ones. And that's why fans still connect with them, even years after the show's conclusion. The humour is another key part of the show's legacy. The IT Crowd wasn't afraid to be absurd, to go beyond what was expected of a traditional sitcom. Its offbeat, dry humour set it apart from other comedies on television at the time. In a world where many sitcoms relied heavily on laugh tracks and punchlines, the IT Crowd kept things fresh with its surrealism, deadpan delivery, and witty social commentary. The show's ability to balance outlandish humour with moments of genuine warmth and vulnerability made it stand out in the crowded landscape of 2000s television. But it's not just the characters and the humour that made the IT Crowd a beloved classic. It's also the way it captured the essence of its time. At the height of the internet age, when technology was becoming an increasingly integral part of everyday life, the show humorously explored our relationship with computers, office culture, and the role of IT professionals. The outdated technology and strange office politics might seem like relics of the past now, but they also reflect a period in time when the internet and technology were still seen as mysterious, sometimes confusing entities. The show's approach to these themes felt relatable, especially for anyone working in an office or trying to navigate the world of computers during the early 2000s. The IT Crowd also paved the way for other shows that would take a similar approach to blending absurdity with heart. Shows like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Parks and Recreation, and The Good Place have all been able to draw from the playbook that the IT Crowd laid down, with quirky characters and fast-paced humour that is still anchored by moments of emotional depth. The legacy of the IT Crowd is very much alive in the way these shows have embraced offbeat comedy, eccentric personalities, and character-driven storytelling. Even beyond TV, the show's cultural impact is still felt. Fans continue to reference the IT Crowd in online forums, social media, and even in tech culture. The iconic line, "Have you tried turning it off and on again?" has become so ingrained in pop culture that it's often said in jest in real-life IT departments. The show's blend of tech humor, workplace absurdity, and quirky character dynamics has made it a touchstone for fans who want to reminisce about the good old days of the early internet age. And let's not forget the devoted fan base. The IT Crowd has continued to find new fans long after its original airing, with streaming platforms allowing a new generation to discover the show. People still return to the episodes, revisiting the old jokes, the iconic moments, and the lovable characters. In many ways, it's the type of show that never really goes away. It just becomes part of the cultural fabric, constantly referenced and rewatched, even years after its finale. So when we look back on the IT Crowd, we see more than just a quirky sitcom about a group of tech misfits. We see a show that has left its mark on comedy, pop culture, and television itself, with its quirky characters, absurd situations, and brilliantly dry humour. The IT Crowd remains a classic, proving that sometimes the strangest, most unexpected shows can have the most lasting impact.